This is the Functional Rehab Podcast with your host, Dr. Ashley Mack. We live in an amazing time in the Earth's existence because the technology that is available to us today allows us to be able to provide services to people all across the world. In some cases, you might be listening to this in the comfort of your own home, but you might be listening to this episode as you're out on a walk in beautiful, sunny Italy. And so we have the opportunity to be able to reach not only millions of people, but also unlimited amount of locations. And so it brought up the concept of the digital nomad lifestyle, which I thought was a really great subject and topic that I wanted to talk about today. And what is that? And we're going to discuss what a digital nomad is and how to navigate the system, and also some things to consider if you're looking at trying to pursue the digital nomad life. But I wanted to be able to say or share this experience with an expert in being a digital nomad, and also just how to care for yourself as a digital nomad. So today I have Dr. Mohammed Ashori, who is a digital nomad himself, but also helps other digital nomads navigate the healthcare system and also provides amazing care. So Dr. Ashori, so good to see you, and thank you so much for being on today's episode.
Awesome, Ashley. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's obviously an honor. You and I have exchanged some good comments back and forth on LinkedIn. It's always amazing to hear your perspective on things. So yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about me, and then I'll go from there. So I became a digital nomad unknowingly, but back in 2016. I'm a family medicine physician. I've been training, I trained at UCLA. I've been working at large organizations like Kaiser Permanente, and worked into urgent care, did a lot of family medicine type stuff. But 2016, I said, it'd be nice to just be able to live somewhere else now that I'm doing some of this telehealth stuff. Back then, it was becoming popular. So I did my first test run. I went to Sacramento, stayed with my mom, of course, like every good son, Iranian son should do. And I tried it out, and it worked. So I said, okay, well, I'm working remotely. I'm seeing my patients, and it was great. So I said, all right, I got to learn a new language. So 2016, I moved on to Spain. And that's where I really put it to the test. And I started actually seeing patients remotely, being a digital nomad, and kind of slowly moved from there. That's a little bit about me. I can, of course, give you, what the digital nomad Wikipedia definition might be as well.
I love it. I want to take a break right there because what's really interesting, and I live out here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and out here it's like a very big, large tech sector. And so my wife, throughout the majority of her career, has spent time in tech, and here I am spending my career in healthcare. And I remember when she transitioned from, say, like the finance world to the tech world, and learned that she can actually work from home. And I remember being introduced to that, and I said, well, that's amazing. Who doesn't love being at home, and who doesn't love spending time with their partners and everything like that? So I actually had the opportunity to experience a very abbreviated version of a digital nomad lifestyle, where there was a point in time where I had my brick and mortar business in New Jersey, and I had a fully functioning staff where I actually no longer needed to be there. What was really interesting in healthcare, especially in physical therapy, in order for you to care for your patients, you had to be there. You actually had to interact with your patients. And it was really interesting. I had the chance to travel the world with my wife on her work trips, which was very, very cool. But it really got me looking into, all right, well, how can we provide the care in a different capacity? So it's really cool for you to be able to, one, initially test it out back in 2016, 2017. It's so cool to be able to expand upon that. And then, boom, here we are in a world where the 2020 pandemic really forced everyone to transition to a more of a remote digital age where we really didn't have a choice. So it was really cool to see that you were on the forefront of that. For the listeners who are like, oh, digital nomad, I've kind of seen that on Instagram, or tell us a little bit more about what you would consider a digital nomad to be.
Yeah, I mean, exactly as you said, a lot of us just get kind of thrown into it, and then you trial it and you're like, this is really interesting. So maybe a more encompassing definition for the audience that's listening, a digital nomad is somebody who probably makes the majority of their income virtually, digitally. So they can work online and make their money. So imagine somebody who can type something into a computer, boom, that's their income. They can clock in, they can clock out, they might be an independent contractor. The nomadic part comes from the fact that they actually leverage this ability to work remotely to travel the world. So somebody might just do 2 weeks in one place and hop all around. I would say my girlfriend falls a little bit more into that category. And then somebody might be a little bit more boring like me. I'll stay in one place for 3 months, a year. I was going to say 6 years, 3 months, a year. Then I'll slowly kind of go to another location after I really, really explored it. So some people through this entire experience will also realize like, oh my God, I really love Malaysia. Oh my God, I fell in love with Taiwan. I really fell in love with Turkey. And so they might stay there for a long time or make that their base out of Europe and go to different places. So that's kind of a broad definition. And there's the digital nomad police, Ashley. They're out there and they're very particular about what the definition's got to be. But that's pretty much it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's something different compared to what the typical lifestyle is where you set down your roots. And usually when you set down your roots, it's kind of like you're either your forever home or you're just going to be able to build your life for an extended period of time. And so with this concept of being able to transition, whether it be, traveling every 2 weeks or moving locations every 3 to 6 months or a year, there are probably a couple different challenges that you face or a couple different scenarios that you face that people who are staying put in one specific home that they don't face at all. So you work with digital nomads and you're a digital nomad yourself. What are some of the challenges when it comes to say, well, being that this is a rehab podcast, like let's talk about like the health and wellness standpoint. Like what are some of the challenges you see there?
Yeah, absolutely. When the pandemic hit and people started working from home, many got the taste of what it's like to work remotely and not have to go in. And in the beginning, I think it can be really fun. But very quickly, you can also fall into certain habits that we're not accustomed to as a society. And I would maybe categorize the big three that I've noticed and that I address with the patients that I see. Obviously, I see people who are digital nomads as a digital nomad doctor. So food and kind of what you're eating, I think is number one. So kind of your day-to-day diet. The second one is your exercise and just your activity level, the sedentary part and, how much muscle mass you might lose being sedentary. And then the third one is a little bit more broad, but I kind of categorize it as stress, sleep, and social because they're really intertwined. And we can dive into each one of those in a little bit of detail.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really appreciate how you categorize in the big three. It's a great way because there's so many things that fall under each one of them, but I'm glad that you were able to really focus on like specific points. So let's talk about food, right? I think what's really interesting, and I'll just speak on like the majority of Americans, it's like we love food, but also there's so much information. There's so many products that are out there. There's a lot of processing. Like it's pretty much kind of like information overload. And so when it comes to the challenges with food, I'm assuming as a digital nomad, when you're not having like your home base, I'm assuming that one, you can either migrate towards say the strictly restaurant eating if you know that you're not going to be cooking for a long period of time, as well as even just trying to navigate a local grocery store. And then the third part of it is that you might actually move into what some people would consider a food desert. So with the patients that you see, what are some of the common trends and around food that you've noticed that your patients are encountering?
So I think people fall into two categories. I have the group that is so obsessive about their health and diet. So they're like, I'm going to cook. Maybe I'm going to treat myself once a week. And in this category, they're generally healthy. Their weight is good. They don't experience a lot of, acne, bloating, abdominal pain, gastrointestinal complaints. The second category, they're sort of at the whim of the place they're going to go, right? You go to Turkey and you're eating all these kebabs and meats and street food. You go to Vietnam and you're just getting pho and you're getting some street food. And then you go to Spain. If you're in southern Spain, you're getting a ton of rice and meat. If you're in northern Spain, you get a lot of fish and potatoes. So these two big categories, the first one's kind of easy because you decide that I'm going to follow this diet that I know works good for me. It worked for me back when I was home in Canada, US. I'm sure you have listeners from all over the world. And I'm going to try to prepare meals, maybe with a bit of a flair of the local style. Like when I was in Mexico with my girlfriend, I purchased a little comal, which is a kind of a ceramic dish that you cook on the fire with. And I started making some of the local dishes, but I was mostly still eating whole foods type of stuff, not a lot of processed stuff. And for those people, it's kind of easy. And in the second category, when you're really just saying, I'm just going to go eat out and see what comes of it, I still think you can do a lot there. I think you can still make some really good choices. But unfortunately, you could also fall into the expat trap of just eating out at the places that are popular. And that can lead to weight gain, acne, joint pains, all the things that I'm sure you've discussed about other health-related issues.
One thing that I like to do whenever I visit a different country is to actually see what the McDonald's look like, actually. I'm always very, very intrigued to just see what it's like. And I remember my first European trip when I was in high school. We went to France. We were in Paris, and I literally saw like the most beautiful McDonald's that I've ever seen ever. And I remember at the time we were kind of craving American style coffee, and that was actually the place where you can get an American style coffee at like the typical 8-ounce serving that you would get. And so I definitely can see how like eating McDonald's every day is like just one exaggeration, but I can see how as an expat, where you want to have some of those more either familiar flavors or then go into like the more local, more popular spots amongst that area. And I really appreciate that you've seen two types of people. And I really appreciate that the folks who want to cook a little bit more. And ultimately the great news is that when you are cooking, you have a lot more control over what you're putting in your body. And I think I read a couple of different articles where we'll just say like the Europe versus the US, like there's definitely a bunch of ingredients that you can't access in Europe because the American ingredients aren't even allowed there. So it ends up just changing the palate of the foods and gives people an opportunity to truly have control over the foods that they put in their body because it's the fuel. And especially when I interact with people who want to lose weight or want to feel better, a lot of people will actually overlook the things that they put in their body. And so I'm so glad that you brought that up. And especially when I've like spoken with other health people, it's like everyone says like, okay, you got to eat healthy. But the next question is, well, how do you make that possible? So I really appreciate you sharing that. Let's talk about exercise and activity, right? Because I just know, so I used to live in Hoboken, New Jersey. And what was interesting was that they weren't necessarily digital nomads, but they were management consultants. So they would actually be out of the Hoboken, New Jersey area. They would be like in the Midwest from like Monday through Thursday. And because they were gone Monday through Thursday, it made them a little hesitant to actually join a gym in Hoboken, New Jersey, because they're only saying, I'm only going to be here Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Why would it make sense for me to get a gym membership here? I'm only probably going to be here once a week. So from your experience, tell us a little bit more about the challenges from a physical activity standpoint that digital nomads face as compared to people with home roots.
Yeah, I mean, you said it very well. Like you assume that, oh, it's okay, it's just a few days, and so I'm not going to join a gym. I'm not going to do the exercise. I like to tell my patients that the exercise you didn't do today is not one you can make up tomorrow. Now, I know that sounds a little bit like, doom and gloom, but it just means that it's really helpful. It's really vital to just a little bit every single day, get some sort of activity in you, especially if you got a sedentary job. What I kind of noticed when I started traveling around the world and being a digital nomad is that some nomads they work 8-hour days. I'm fortunate that I don't work an 8-hour day. I set my own schedule. But if you work 8 hours a day and you're in front of a computer, it means you get up in the morning, you're probably prepping, and then that's it, you're sitting. And then you're exhausted, you're going to go eat. So the chance that you're going to actually go and do something active is low. And those 8 hours in between of being sedentary, you lost a lot of muscle mass, obviously not in one sitting, but over time. You got a lot of tight fascia, right? Your joints are misaligned. And so by the time you go in and do some stretches, that's going to create some issues. So the sedentary part is the biggest problem that I see. And especially when someone's like, oh, it's okay, I'm going to go here and I'm just going to bust out this project for 2 weeks, but they're going to spend 3 months recovering from that 2-week episode. So again, with exercise, it's one of those things: stretching, resistance training. And I'll say, I know I'm a little bit different with the cardio part. I think we overdo it in America with cardio. I think we don't get enough resistance. We don't get enough stretching and balance training. But I think the cardio is something, even if you just do it a few times a week, once a week of really good cardio, you can still get a lot of benefits from the resistance training. So that's one of the main things I see. And I always like to get somebody to just resistance bands. And for some of my patients, I will mail them one because it's cheap on Amazon, right? I can just send them one, be like, you're doing this. It's super simple.
I love that. Yeah, I think one of the I'm so glad you brought up the aspect of being sedentary. I just know that with my experiences, say doing like long-term rentals, Airbnbs, oftentimes you're not getting like the typical workplace setup that you have. So you're kind of at the mercy of whatever furniture is available. So the only thing that you have is the kitchen table. You're sitting at the kitchen table. And the only thing that you have is just your couch and a lap desk. You're kind of confined to that specific area. And yeah, there's like, especially if you're in the creative space or the digital space, it's so easy to get sucked in to your world. And I'm so glad you tell them to get up and move around. And especially, I think what's really cool about the rest of the world is that the rest of the world outside of the US is kind of geared to walking a little bit more. And we kind of lose that when you transition, when you're looking at like the typical American suburb community, unless you're in like a metropolitan area like in New York City where you can walk everywhere. And so I'm really glad that you brought up the importance of stretching. It's actually something that I recommend to a lot of the patients that I work with, because they're dealing with a lot of orthopedic aches and pains. And oftentimes if they're spent 8 hours a day in one specific position, they're going to be tight, they're going to be stiff. I know that if I'm sitting at my computer cross-legged, writing like a couple of different emails, or even just like sitting back-to-back podcasts like I'm doing right now, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to be like, ooh, I'm a little tight. And I really appreciate you bringing up the importance of strength training. There's a lot of studies showing that now is the more muscle mass we lose, it has a huge effect in regards to our health. I like to say that muscle is a functional unit. Fat is not as much. You can't really do much with fat aside from store muscle and keep yourself warm. And so we need to be able to train those muscles. And thank you, Dr. Ashori, for saying that we might be doing too much cardio. There's a lot of people who really love that high intensity stuff. I was guilty of it myself. But for the most cases, yeah, you don't need to I like to say you don't need to breathe fire every single day in order for you to benefit. So that's cool. It's amazing to hear that you send your patients resistance bands too, because it's like 1, takes up little to no space, 2, it's light, and 3, it's easy to follow. So some really, really good stuff there. So we have food, we have exercise and activity, getting people to move. And then the third category is going to be the stress, sleep, and social aspect, which I know for myself, if I ever travel and I actually have a sleep tracker, I wear a Whoop strap. And I know that whenever I travel, I don't sleep very well on an airplane. So I know that I remember the past couple of times I've taken a red eye, my Whoop will actually say, you've gotten 0 hours of sleep, or didn't actually log in any sort of sleep. So that's number 1. And then usually my first night of sleep at any hotel, at any Airbnb, or even a bed that isn't my own, I get less than optimal sleep. So tell us a little bit more about the challenges with sleep, stress, and social for a digital nomad.
Actually, you brought up a really, really good point. Sometimes you romanticize this digital nomad life for yourself, and you do it a few times, and you recognize, oh my goodness, like my body got wrecked after this trip. And it's such a good, insightful thing. Here with me, with my patients, I'm all about patient empowerment, patient education. I want you to have all the knowledge necessary to make your best health decisions so you don't ever need me, right? That's the goal. That's why people like yourself, physical therapists, are so valuable to people, because if somebody can go to a physical therapist, they get that initial assessment. What the physical therapist is going to do is empower them with all these things that they can do moving forward. So number one, you have to be aware of what the limitations of your mind, your body is. So if you go and you're working a lot, you're in this new setting, and then you're traveling again in 2 weeks, you have to book another Airbnb, that decision fatigue is unbelievable. The low dose amount of constant cortisol that you release absolutely wrecks your body. It messes with your insulin. It messes with your thyroid. For women, it really affects their estrogen levels. For men, it can also mess with their testosterone. So that's constant low level stress is problematic. And I think sometimes staying in one place longer can be effective. Meditation, mindfulness can be incredibly effective for some people, not everybody. And the other point you brought up is sleep, right? Whether you wear an Oura ring or any other type of device that works good for you, tracking your sleep is great, and just understanding whether you feel restful at by the end of the sleep. In the morning you wake up, do you feel rested? Do you need another nap? And that can get thrown off. And when you're traveling every 2 weeks, especially if you're changing time zones, it's brutal on your body. I'm 45, so I feel things are a little bit different now. Like everything just hits me like a little sucker punch a little bit harder. And all of this actually, and you mentioned this very well, the kind of the food in other countries in Europe versus in America, some of that is also offset by the amount of socialization that we get. You see the Spanish people smoke a lot of cigarettes. They drink a lot of alcohol, but their alcoholic liver disease and their lung cancer rates are lower, likely because they're also socialized more. They get that oxytocin release. They're really bonding with each other. They're doing it over a social setting. And I think that aspect, whatever country you're in, whatever language you speak, if you can throw yourself and immerse yourself, make some new friends. And the number two tricks I always tell my digital nomads is, one, ask for help. So go knock on somebody's door below you at the Airbnb. Say, hey, sorry, do you have like some milk I can borrow? Because if you run into that person again, they'll actually be committed to helping you the next time. It's one of these weird things. And then number two, ask people if you can help. Whatever, if you're on the street and somebody needs something moved or a neighbor says something, always try. And that's going to create that kind of bond. And I think it's a lovely, lovely way to improve your, decrease your social anxiety levels and decrease your stress levels.
That's huge. I think I didn't even consider that, but as you're telling me this, I'm like, oh, I could see how if you're keeping to yourself because you're traveling from one place to the other, it can get a little lonely. And I think it was an article that I read recently. They were talking about loneliness is actually a very large part of like the health aspect, right? And it became even more apparent during the pandemic when people truly were forced to not interact with each other. So I really appreciated you saying like asking for help and reaching out to the community. And I'm glad that you brought up the observation about people in Spain is like they drink so much alcohol and they smoke, but yet like they're having a lot less chronic disease. And I noticed that when my wife and I were in Italy. We went to Italy twice, once in 2022 and once last year in 23. And one, the wine was amazing, but I remember the person showing us around was like smoking like a chimney. And I was like, how is this possible? How does he like look pretty healthy and drinks all this wine, but literally in the span of maybe 2 hours of wine tasting, he went through an entire carton of cigarettes, and I was blown away how that happened. And it was really, really something. It definitely did not make me want to smoke. I'll tell you that. I was not like, ooh, I want to try this out, but I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, I can imagine how, especially if you go into a new country or even just a new city. I know that for me, luckily for me, when I reach out to people like you, it's like, okay, I've been following you a little bit on LinkedIn, and it's like, okay, I feel like I kind of know you, so talking with you was a little bit easier. But if I saw you, Dr. Ashori, on the street and we've never met before, it's just, I have some anxieties of like meeting completely new people. So that's actually one of the reasons why I'm so lucky to have a platform like this, but I can see how challenging it is to just go and just put yourself out there. And so I really appreciate you saying that. It's just like, it's ask for help, reach out to the people like next to you, because having that sense of community is going to allow you to really just like weather the storm, moving, changing locations, having to acclimate to different places as exciting as it is also a stress. It's something that is outside our norm. Now, maybe I would be intrigued to see over the next, say, 10 to 15 years where, digital nomads have been, part of the community for, 10 to 15 years. What's that like compared to someone who has, say, like the roots? That'd be so interesting to see, but I'm so glad that you're able to bring that up. So we have, we covered the importance of food, the things that you put in your body, movement and exercise, and then stress, sleep, and the social aspect. And all of this stuff is identifying challenges and how we can actually overcome it so we can keep our health at its peak. But there are going to be times, unfortunately, where we are going to be in pain. So the second part of this interview is just trying to understand how can you navigate a healthcare system or an ever-changing healthcare system if you're going from place to place. And so this is like a very broad topic, but for digital nomads, as you are, say, getting prepared to become a digital nomad, saying I'm going to go from place to place or transitioning to the next location, what are some tips or action steps that they can take to help them get a better idea of being able to say, what do I do if I get sick? What do I do if this emergency happens? Let's go through some of that thought process and action to give them some clarity in regards to navigating the system.
Sure. And I'll start by saying that anybody who's already listening to a podcast like this is at least half of the way there, because the education part of this, this podcast university that you are a member of, everything you're learning by listening to other people like Ashley and myself, it just empowers you and it gives you something to reference. So when you go, God forbid, you end up in a hospital or somewhere, need surgery out of the country, you can at least have a good conversation. You're getting both points. Ashley is somebody who just does a great job asking really good, insightful questions. So you can do the same with that physician. Ask insightful questions. Doctor, what would you do if you were in my shoes? What if you had this? What would you do? So number one, educate yourself, feel empowered, know that you can speak up. No, don't be intimidated by doctors. We're always intimidated by doctors. I'm intimidated by the doctors, but they're just like anybody else. They're just human beings. We're just as afraid and insecure about everything that we say and do. So be open and ask questions, number one. Number two, you need to have your healthcare team. I know that's not a popular stance in America. We have a lot of this individualism in America, meaning me, myself, and I stand here powerful and strong. But the truth is, when we do, and all of us will eventually have some sort of a mini health crisis, most of us are going to have one big health crisis in our lives. It's nice to have that healthcare team of yours. Who is it? Maybe it's a family member who's a doctor. Maybe it's a nurse in the family. But it should, in my opinion, it should always be that family medicine doctor, your primary care doctor, your naturopath. Some people believe in chiropractors. They want their chiropractors to be their functional medicine doctors, integrative medicine doctor, whatever you love, the Ayurvedic doctor, the Chinese herbalist. But you need somebody who gets to know you, who understands you, and whom you can turn to for questions should something happen, just to be able to run it by them. I can't do much for my patients when they're admitted for kidney stone and the surgeon there says, hey, we got to do a major operation on your kidney. But I can tell them, these are the questions I want you to ask. I want you to get these labs and these images, send them to me, let me review them. Sometimes, most of the time, I say, kidney stone of 5 millimeters doesn't need surgery. They want to do surgery on you, I get it. Listen, fly back, we'll get you situated. So always just having somebody that can just guide you. So feel empowered and have somebody that you can turn to.
Which then brings me to my next question. You do a phenomenal job of caring for your patients, and hearing and seeing like your posts and like how you care for your patients. I was intrigued and excited to hear that you were able to do what you do with the patients who pretty much travel the globe. So, Dr. Shore, can you share with us a little bit more about your practice, what you do for your patients, and tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, my patients, many of them are digital nomads. So they probably find me many find me on LinkedIn. They find me on my website. My website is at digitalnomadhealth.com. And these are people who usually are generally healthy, but they know that they're about to travel the world. And they know that a health insurance doesn't mean health. They know that health insurance is going to protect them against a major financial catastrophe, but that their health most of it is in their hand. But they need somebody like a quarterback or somebody guiding them, helping them make good decisions. So that's me. They pay me a monthly fee to become a member in my practice. And most of the people are generally very good about not just listening to me, but also doing a lot for their health. And the times that we have a lot of interactions is unfortunately when something bad happens. I had a gentleman who ended up with severe chest pain in the ER. He had a very extensive workup. Thank God everything was okay, but it was dicey for a while and he was out of the country. So those are the moments where you just feel like, oh, I'm going to call Mo. Dude, Mo, what's going on? Or they'll text me, those are the times it's really nice to have somebody on your side.
And are you saying that you help the majority of the folks who actually go overseas, or in like the United States, are those folks you help out as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have also quite a few patients in my practice who are just here in California. I also have a state license in Alaska, and they too, they're not nomads. They're just regular old, simple garden variety. But they do want somebody that's kind of their primary care doctor, somebody they can always communicate with. My practice, I only have 150 people that's the biggest my panel will ever get. So we do a lot of texting, we do messages, I do WhatsApp. We're always in communication. And we do annual risk assessments for every one of my patients to assess what is your risk in the future of developing any potential disease. Let's set out 3 things that we can do to mitigate that risk. So those are the things that are important to me. I think prevention still trumps most of the treatments we have in Western medicine, and I try to focus on that with my patients.
That's huge. I'm really glad that you're pretty much meeting patients where they're at. And so instead of actually having to go into the office, which I know that can actually be challenging, I know that even when I have to schedule my doctor's appointments, I'm like, I have to schedule around the patients that I see. So being able to have that flexibility in communication is huge. And I also really appreciate the annual risk assessment. It kind of reminds me of what it was like when I was in school, where I had to get an annual physical to actually get ready to play sports. And it gives me, I remember, well, at the time I didn't really care because I was just a student who just wanted to play, but I'm sure it gave my parents a little bit more ease to be able to say, okay, my kid is healthy enough to play. But I especially know that as I get older, I want to be able to assess the risks and things that are happening. So I'm glad that you're able to have that. And unfortunately, Westernized medicine, especially American medicine, there isn't that much time, effort, and money spent on the prevention aspect of things. And I find that to be so intriguing. But I'm very glad that you're able to address it with your patients. And I'm glad that you said that you have a limit on the patients, so then that way you can really provide the care that you can. Because I'm sure when, like, early in your career, when you had to manage, 4,000 to 5,000 patients, it was
right.
a lot to handle and manage, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. I have 2 feet and 1 foot is in this practice of mine. And every time I come back to the US for a few months, I go back into the traditional urgent care and family medicine practice. And as you said, I think people are in that disease based system. We're just, here's a disease, let's treat it. Here's a disease, let's treat it.
And one benefit that I think you talked about briefly during today's episode, but I'll bring it up again, is the accessibility. And I think that was one of the big pieces that was shown during the pandemic in regards to telemedicine, is the fact that if you're in the middle of nowhere, say like you're in Idaho and the nearest doctor is 100 miles away, and that doctor actually covers a 200-mile radius, it's going to be hard to get in contact with that doctor because they have so many patients, and also even just trying to get in touch with them or even getting to site. And so you're really solving this access problem because you, the listener, the patient, can actually reach out to Dr. Shourie to be able to address the problems on site. And I really appreciate it. I'm really thankful that you're able to provide all of this. And so for the listeners that are thinking, oh man, I am either a digital nomad or I'm considering to be a digital nomad and want to take charge of my health, or for the folks who are saying, you know what, Dr. Shourie sounds like an amazing doctor and I wanted to be my primary care doc. Can you tell us again a little bit more about your contact info and how people can get in touch?
Sure. So best place to find me is at digitalnomadhealth.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Mohammed Ashori. That's my name on LinkedIn. And if you want to send me an email, if you have any questions, DRMO, that's Dr. Mo at digitalnomadhealth.com. Again, whatever I can do to help somebody improve their health, prevent disease, that's my passion right now, at least over the next few decades. So yeah, I would love to help.
Listeners, if you did not get a chance to write that information down, I'm going to put Dr. Ashori's information into the show notes. Dr. Ashori, it was great to see you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ashley.
No patient-therapist relationship is formed by listening to this podcast. We are not providing medical advice, and all information should be confirmed by a medical provider.